All right, what do you say we go ahead and get things started? Good morning, everybody, and welcome to PMA's webinar, Be in the Know About Building Performance Regulations. It's wonderful to see so many of you here today. We are recording today's webinar, and we will make the slide deck available to you with live links to all the great resources that our presenters have. I know that's one of the first questions we always receive in the chat. Speaking of questions, if you have questions throughout the seminar, you can certainly share those in the chat. And we will also stick around a little bit at the conclusion of the webinar to have some conversations if you have specific questions for our panelists and presenters. So before we get started on this wonderful content, we have a few companies that we need to thank. They include our 2023 Platinum sponsors, including InterSolutions, Residency Bureau, and Tepfer Construction Company. Our 2023 Gold sponsors, which include American Pest, Brothers Paving and Concrete, Capital Canopies, Electronic Security Services, Hawkins Electric, Minkoff Company, JB Klein, Multi-Housing Depot, Planned Companies, and Pothole Repair. And then we have our 2023 Silver sponsors, including Berkshire, Donaldson, Finley Asphalt and Concrete, Kenmore, Orendorf and Spade, PC Richard, Quest Insurance, Rain and Sun, Thomasville Restoration, and TRC Engineering. Our corporate sponsors go above and beyond in supporting PMA, and we ask that you keep these companies top of mind when you're in the market for new products and services. They make much of what we do at PMA possible, including these free webinars. So keep them in mind and be sure to thank them for their support when you see them out and about in the community. Also wanted to make the group aware of some upcoming awards programs. Our PACE award entry process is complete. We have about 200 properties competing for best in show and bragging rights within the Washington metro area. And in addition to that, we're continuing to accept nominations for our leasing professional and our maintenance professional awards programs. Those entries are due tomorrow, June 30th. And then we are also accepting EPIC Award nominations, as well as our Marketing and Advertising Excellence Awards. Those entries, you have a little bit more time. You have until September 1st to get those submitted. And then in terms of upcoming events, we have some major ones coming up. Our Lobster Bake with the theme of Lobstercella, a nod to Coachella, will be happening on Thursday, August 17th at Smoky Glen Farm in Gaithersburg. And then we have our PM Expo. The theme this year is Game On. That's happening October 25th at the Gaylord in National Harbor. We'll have a great exhibit hall, as well as fantastic education from Rachel Druckenmiller, who helped us kick off our year, inspiring us all, and she's going to help us level up even further at Expo. And then we have our awards ceremony. So all the awards programs I just mentioned will culminate with our awards ceremony on November 29th at the Ritz-Carlton in Tyson's Corner. So what do you say we get to today's content? Our program and seminar committee got a great recommendation from Elizabeth Kirk at TRC Engineering to talk about building performance regulations and give you guys the tips and tools and basic information that you need to know about BEPS. We've tapped a panel of experts to share their information and resources with you. And to facilitate the conversation, we have Hannah Tillmann with Berkshire Residential. She is their Vice President of Sustainability, and we'll take it from here.
Thank you, Sarah. Hi, everyone. I'm super excited to be here with our all-star panelists. We are thrilled to walk you through the basics of these regulations that could be impacting you or your properties in the DMV area. We're going to highlight some tools and resources to help you comply with these regulations. And then finally, really focus on discussing ways that you can drive value through your proactive measures to comply with these regulations, as opposed to a check the box mechanism and being done with it. So we have a great lineup of expert panelists today that will be sharing their insights with you. I'm going to give a high-level introduction, and then each of them will share a quick bio and background about themselves and their organization. So up first, we have Yolanda Bonner. She's the Associate Director of Building Performance at the Institute for Market Transformation. Second, we have Luke Lanciano, Manager of Sustainability and Energy Management at the Bernstein Management Corporation. And finally, we have Adam Landsman, President of PulseIQ. So I'll give each of these panelists time to give themselves a quick introduction. And Yolanda, we can start with you.
Thank you, Hannah. As she stated, my name is Yolanda Bonner. I am the Associate Director of the Building Innovation Hub, and I specifically focus on building performance. So that's pretty much educating building managers, building owners, investors on the BEPS process. I actually come to this as a facilities manager. My background is in property management. I've spent about the last 16 years. I worked for Brookfield Properties. I worked for Vesta, formerly known as Lily Bridge, and just recently the Department of General Services as the facilities manager over DC Fire EMS. So I'm excited to take on this role because I get to help those who are in the seats that I was recently in and get them and help them in understanding the BEPS process. So.
Great. And then Luke, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thanks so much, Hannah. My name is Luke Lanciano. I'm the Manager of Sustainability at Bernstein Management Corporation. I've been with Bernstein Management about 10 years. I've worked in a variety of roles. So I started kind of like Yolanda on the property level, working at, facilities across Montgomery County and DC. I think working my current role, managing our energy use and sustainability policies, it's really helpful to have that background because at the end of the day, the people on site using, maintaining these systems are really key players in making our buildings more sustainable, healthier, and creating the projects and the budgets for future years to really improve the building. So really glad to be here and look forward to talking more with folks. Another note, I'm also on the Montgomery County Building Performance Improvement Board. Nothing I say is representative of that board specifically, but I do look forward to chatting more about the issues in Maryland and Montgomery County as it relates to BEPS.
Great. And Adam, we'll finish up with you.
Hi, Adam Landsman. I'm the president of PulseIQ. We provide innovative energy efficiency products and services for multifamily properties in the DMV. Like my fellow panelists, I also spent the early part of my career in the property management space. I spent 10 years as a portfolio manager in the multifamily market. So I know the challenges that property managers are dealing with because I have been one and I have sat in that chair. In addition to Luke, I'm also on the Montgomery County Building Performance Improvement Board, and I echo his disclaimer that anything I say here is my own personal opinion and does not represent that of the board. I'm also on the Advisory Council for the Maryland Clean Energy Center. So we look forward to telling you more about BEPS and benchmarking today. Thanks everyone for joining, and thank you to my fellow panelists for being here with me.
Great. Thanks, Adam. So let's get started. Yolanda, the Institute of Market Transformation tracks and in many cases is involved with the development of building performance standards across the country. Do you mind giving us an overview of the regulations that we have here in DC, how our association members can comply with these regulations, and what the consequences of non-compliance are as well?
Okay, no problem. So we're going to start with an introduction of the hub itself, just to let you guys know exactly who we are and where we sit in the eye of BEPS. So we are, I'm sorry, someone else is controlling. Okay. What's going on? Feels like somebody else is controlling.
It doesn't say anybody else is controlling, but perhaps your slides are on a timer. Hold on, I'll take control back and I'll
Okay.
get it. You
Thank you. I
talking.
appreciate that. So back to what I was saying, the Building Innovation Hub is There we go. The Building Innovation Hub, a project of IMT, helps the building industry professionals in and around the Washington, D.C. area create and operate high-performing buildings. The hub connects professionals and provides information and programming. The goal of the hub is to meet the current needs of the building industry while simultaneously pushing the industry towards innovative solutions that we will need to build and operate high-performing buildings. Next slide, please. And also before I move a little further, I do want to let you guys know about some of the members that we currently have here at the hub. They range from DPR Construction to Clark Construction to Retech to Stephen Winters Associates Bowling. And we've recently had some new members join our team, which is Lightility. I'm sorry, Lightility, and my brain is drawing a blank because I'm new at this and I don't do a lot of speaking, public speaking, so forgive me for it. And Haphold, I'm sorry.
You're doing
So,
great.
Next slide, please. Where we fit in all of this, it's pretty much as a support for DC Sustainability, Energy Utility, which is DC ETU, DC Green Bank, Departments of Building, and DC Department of Energy, DOEE. As you can see, we sit at the end, but we provide support for each of these entities, and that helps educate each and every one on the process of BEPS. Next slide. BEPS in the district. We're going to talk about the timelines and the next steps and some support that you can gain when you're dealing with BEPS. Linking to BEPS goals. BEPS it's important to remember that what this is all about, the reason these regulations exist is to combat climate change. This is one way we can all say with what will eventually be data as concrete evidence that our individual actions made a difference, and here's how. DC has a vision to be carbon neutral and climate resilient by 2050. There are a number of ways the city is working to meet those goals, one of which is looking at the building stock in DC. Since building accounts for 73% of the district's GHG emission reduction, the amount of energy used in buildings is paramount in order to achieve the district's climate commitments. The building energy performance standards are regulatory tools that the district is using to help meet its green building and climate goals. Next slide, please. What is BEPS? So that's what everybody seems to be wondering. BEPS is a set of minimum thresholds for energy performance for existing buildings. These standards are based on and measured against a building's demonstrated energy performance as shown in the benchmarking chart to the side. Anything below the yellow line is considered non-compliant. Anything above the line is compliant. And then the next two slides, you'll get a little bit more detail on where your building sits and the scores that are required. So any building that's 50,000 square feet or greater, they've been benchmarking since 2013, and that BEPS cycle started January the 1st, 2021. Buildings that are 25,000 square feet or greater started benchmarking in 2021, and their BEPS cycle started January the 1st, will start January the 1st of 2027. And in 2024, buildings 10,000 square feet or greater will be required to start benchmarking in 2024, and that cycle starts January the 1st, 2023. Next slide, please. Energy Star Portfolio Manager. If you do not take anything else from me, please remember this. This is where you start. This is where all your data is captured. This is your Bible. Make sure that even if you decide to step out and hire a third-party contractor to help you with your benchmarking, make sure to keep up with your information, your login, your password. You need those things. But listed also here are the required scores for your Energy Star portfolio. And I know a lot of you guys are property managers, and maybe most may be in multifamily housing. So as you can see, your Energy Star score minimum is 66. So make sure to pay attention to those scores. Next slide, please. BEPS compliance and pathways and cycles and your options. Next. There are 4 set BEPS compliance pathways. The most common ones are the performance pathway, the standard target pathway, and the prescriptive pathway. The eligibility for each is defined off to the side, which under the performance, you have all building types, standard target pathway or specific property types, and prescriptive pathway are all property types as well. These are evaluated based on performance, except for prescriptive pathway. It's action-based. And that means the completion of the EEMs and reporting requirements with savings comparable to performance pathway is the ultimate goal. Next slide. The compliance pathway. So standard sets, of course, as mentioned in the previous slide, is January the 1st of 2021. Timeline to improve your building performance and report results between April 3rd, 2023, which that deadline has passed, and the start of the benchmark to the start of the year to benchmark performance, January the 1st of 2026. Compliance deadline is December 31st, 2026. The chart is pretty self-explanatory, and I won't go into a lot of details here just for the sake of time, but if you do have any additional questions, feel free to ask those questions in the chat box. Next slide. And this also just reflects the compliance process. Buildings entering the compliance, the pathway selection and approval, which was again due April the 1st, and we've already passed that deadline. Then you have your performance and reporting requirements and end of compliance cycle reporting and evaluation and enforcements. Next slide. There are penalties. There will be penalties. The maximum amount of penalties for buildings is $10 per gross square foot. This shall be no greater than 7.5 million. Note that this maximum penalty and actual penalty is adjusted based on the improvements you do to make the relative requirements of your selected pathway. Next. Now, first steps and what you should do now. Next slide. Long-term thinking. Think big picture. This is something that's not going away. It's going to be here. It's going to continue to be here, and it's going to continue to grow legs, and pretty soon will eventually take over Maryland, as they spoke earlier. What will be the standards in the future BEPS cycle? Is BEPS changing to carbon metric? Won't I be penalized under BEPS for electrifying? How does solar help me with BEPS? Next slide. Actions to take, how to start this process. And what I've had to learn the hard way is data verification. Make sure that everything is pre-checked, double-checked. You have the appropriate vendors that would help you, because I've truly seen a lot of sites that have contacted vendors and the vendors did not know the actual DC protocol, or they will step outside of DC and hire a vendor who does not know the DC protocol. So make sure that when you're doing your data verification, you're doing it correctly and to the standards of which your building is occupied. Check to ensure your benchmarking data is correct, always. Understand compliance pathway options and understand how your building uses energy. Conduct an energy audit. Next slide. First reporting deadlines, as we stated earlier, April the 1st, 2023, that deadline has passed. April the 1st, 2024, the third-party data verification of benchmarking data for cycle year 2023. Make sure you keep up with the dates. When you get a piece of paper in the mail, please keep up with it. It is very important to you. Next slide. Why are we here? The hub is here because we know that BEPS is complicated. There are nuisance requirements. There are a variety of compliance pathways. Laws and regulations vary between jurisdictions, even locally change over time. And then you have the risk mitigation and value creation and impacts existing to buildings as well as new construction buildings. Building owners will need to take action on all buildings, even existing buildings. Next slide. Being critical of BEPS decision points up early. Again, think long-term, think ahead, get ahead of this. Balance upfront costs with long-term compliances, use common language around BEPS, address indirect accountability around energy performance. Consider responsibility for building performance. It is totally in the hands of the property manager or the building owner. Next slide. And there are resources for you, but we will discuss them at the end. There are resources from the DOE Even here at the hub, we have resources for you where we can connect you with vendors and workers that will also help you. We also have financial resources that will be discussed later on in the end, but that is how the hub operates. That's what BEPS is. That's why BEPS exists. And those are the DC regulations. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Yolanda. So what I took away from that, just briefly, right? Key takeaway is if your building is larger than 50,000 square feet, you need to be tracking your electricity and your natural gas data in Energy Star Portfolio Manager and getting it checked by someone who knows what they're doing. And it's great because we've got Adam and Luke who both do this a lot. And actually at Berkshire, we do this a lot too. So we're all happy to share advice and we're going to go into that in more detail. But key takeaway, if your building is greater than 50,000 square feet, and even smaller ones in the future, you have to be paying attention to this or you could face those fines that Yolanda provided an overview of. And so as Yolanda indicated, DC is not the only place where the building or where the BEPS are, coming into play. So Luke, do you want to tell us a little bit about what we're seeing up in Maryland?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Just one second. So both in Maryland and Montgomery County, building energy performance standards have recently been legislated. They're still working through the regulatory process, but we do have some details about how they are set up. Basically, if you are in Montgomery County, you should be thinking of both the Maryland BEPS and the Montgomery County BEPS. We're hoping that there will be some complementarity to them. They are both focused on gas use in particular and the switch from gas over to electricity for more equipment. So that's one thing to really keep in mind. In general, Maryland's their focus and their metric is on what's called net direct greenhouse gas emissions, which basically just means your on-site natural gas use. So there will be a target coming over the next couple of years. There'll be it'll come from the benchmarking basically that happens in a few years in the 2025 calendar year. And you'll have a target to meet that's interim and then a final target in 2040 to basically zero out much of your on-site natural gas use. For buildings in Montgomery or for buildings across Maryland, if your single building is over 35,000 gross square feet, please keep in mind this will apply to you in some fashion. It includes anything from apartment buildings to office buildings. There are certain small exemptions, but please keep an eye out for how it will impact the properties that you're responsible for, because this should really shape the way you think about, especially your 10-year CapEx budgets. There are some draft regulations that the Maryland Department of Energy, Maryland Department of the Environment have posted. So I would read through those. I know reading through regulatory filings are not the most fun, but this is extremely important. So I definitely recommend doing that, seeing how it'll impact you, and then keeping an eye on how that legislation gets implemented there in Maryland. So Yolanda talked a lot about how DC was doing this. It's similar to DC, it'll be benchmarking based. So in Maryland, just any building over 35,000 square feet, just know you should really benchmark it as soon as you can. The more data you have, the better prepared you will be in the future. Now, for those properties that are in Montgomery County, you're obviously already in Maryland, so you should be keeping Maryland's regulations in mind. Montgomery County is a slightly different take on the BEPS target. Their focus is on what's called site energy use intensity, or site EUI, which is basically the amount of energy a property uses in a calendar year divided by the gross square foot of that property. So I know Adam's going to discuss in a little bit about the importance of the square footage calculation, because it is the entire denominator for that metric. But for the energy use, you're basically taking the gas therms and the electric kilowatt hours, converting them into what's called kBTU, sort of a base form of energy. And that's how you're coming up with that figure. There are a few different size thresholds and dates that have already been regulated in Montgomery County, which I'll cover in the next slide. And there are some draft regulations coming later this year from the county's Department of the Environment. So I mentioned earlier, serve on the Montgomery County Building Performance Improvement Board. That board was created with a variety of stakeholders to try to take into account all the many moving pieces in the county to ensure that BEPS can happen fairly and that the regulations make sense. So, if you're interested in learning more about that board, you could even look at check out the public meetings. They're posted on the county's Department of the Environment website. And yeah, it's a 2-hour meeting a couple times a quarter, and I find them really interesting. I hope you do too, but they will become very important very soon if you're in the county. So Montgomery County's deadlines, as well as the buildings they apply to, are sort of listed here in this table. The most important are the sort of the bottom 2 rows. So group 3 and 4, non-residential, 25 to 50K, and then residential over 250K gross square foot. They all had to benchmark this past June 1st. So this is going to be the start of their baseline years for where data is being collected to help set both the interim and then their final BEPS targets. So that, if you have a building in Montgomery County and it meets one of those criteria for building groups, you should have already submitted your information to Montgomery County. If you have not, definitely reach out to them ASAP to make sure that happens. Then the final group, in that final row, group 5, it's residential buildings between 25,000 square feet and 250,000 square feet. So this is, a huge number of multifamily buildings fall into this bucket. And they have not had to benchmark before. So I really highly recommend anyone out there, if you operate a building in Montgomery County and you haven't benchmarked before, double check to see if it qualifies under this group, because 25,000 square feet is relatively small when we're thinking about multifamily properties. So you'll really need to start collecting utility bills ASAP, because that will then feed into the benchmarking information that you submit. So with that benchmarking deadline of June 1st, 2024, that means all of your 2023 data. So January 1st, 2023 to December 31st. And as you can see in that baseline years column, your 2023 data will feed into where your baseline is. So it's really critical that that information is accurate. So there are still some regulatory things to be worked out, but some possible site EUI targets for people to keep in mind. The 2 most common building types are going to be multifamily and office. Multifamily, a possible site EUI target is about a 35. So I would highly recommend check out your benchmarking as it is currently, or benchmark any of your properties that would qualify as soon as you can to see how close you are to that 35 metric, because that'll really be a big determining factor in how you plan over the next few years. Similarly for office properties, most offices in Montgomery County have already been benchmarking, but 53 is likely to be the site EUI target. But again, it's not guaranteed as of this point. Another thing to keep in mind is Montgomery County did something that DC hasn't done, which is provide an allowance for renewable energy. So if you have on-site solar, that will count favorably towards your final BEPS score. If you utilize off-site renewable energy, there will be potentially some credit given to that. So keep that in mind as well. The regulations still haven't been fully fleshed out, so I can't give you any more specifics than that. But it is something to keep in mind as you're planning for these buildings. So for right now, the penalty is in Montgomery County. It's a, more of a Class A misdemeanor with a, potentially, a $500 fine and then $750 potentially each day. This is then stacked on top of potentially the Maryland fines, which are going to be based on the number of greenhouse gas emissions per ton that you are over their limit, which will be applied later on in the 2030s. So just keep those numbers in mind. They might change. So those are some things to really keep in mind when you're operating properties in Montgomery County, operating them in Maryland. And yeah, those are, the regulation should come out later this year for both Maryland and Montgomery County. And as dry as regulatory filings are, like these will be probably some of the most interesting you'll find if you plan to be operating buildings long-term in either of these jurisdictions.
Great, thanks, Luke.
I'll pass it off.
So my key takeaway there, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you're multifamily property greater than 250,000 square feet right now, you should be tracking your data, your energy consumption data in Energy Star, sharing it with Montgomery County. In addition, if you're anywhere in Maryland and Montgomery County, start paying attention to these other regulations coming down the pipeline, because your building will be expected to improve performance just like in DC, right? Okay, great.
Yeah, definitely.
So as Yolanda and Luke both hit on pretty strongly, one of the first things that property owners and managers need to do with regard to all of these regulations is benchmark, which is the industry terminology for just track your energy consumption in this special program called Energy Star Portfolio Manager. Adam is going to walk us through it, but a high-level plug. It's free. It's administered by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. It's considered the best-in-class thing to use. All of the industry professionals that would assist you with this know how to use it, and all of the regulatory entities will accept the data in this format. So Adam, can you give us a quick overview of how to get started with benchmarking, and also why these efforts are so important outside of only using the tool as a compliance mechanism?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. So we're going to get into the nitty-gritty on benchmarking and how to do it. So consider this benchmarking 101 if you haven't done it before. And even if you have, I'm going to point out some things that you may not be aware of or thinking of that you ought to be. So getting into the first question, I can advance the slides here. And I advance the slides. There we go. So what is it? We've talked about what it is. It's the process of how you track your energy performance for your building and compare it to others. And we talk about using the Energy Star Portfolio Manager tool as a best practice, but it's more than that. It's what you have to use. It has to be used for DC. It has to be used for Montgomery County. It will have to be used for Maryland. So there is no other option. And what Energy Star Portfolio Manager is really good at doing is telling you not just how you're doing in and of yourself, but how you relate to similar properties, similar types, age, location, size, across the region and across the nation. And it will give you a score 0 to 100, 0 being the bottom of the barrel worst, 100 being best of the best. Why should I do this? I think, if we're looking at this as checking the boxes of compliance action, we're missing the point, right? And I think, putting on my property manager hat, when I think back to when I was managing budgets, one of the things to keep in mind is that energy is often the single largest controllable expense in a property. Oftentimes it's thought of as a problem without a solution. It's a fact of life. They figure, oh, I'll just go and call my broker and get a cheaper rate, or I'll put some solar on my roof and call it a day. But there's a lot that can be done to save on energy. And just looking at your utilities closely on a consistent basis every year has been shown through multiple studies to gain, on average, about 7% savings. So just looking at your consumption and tracking it will tell you, are you doing well? Are you not doing well? Is my trend line going up or down? And just the cognizance of that leads to better operational management of your energy. So 7%, on a building, especially master meter buildings with central boiler chiller systems, can be a lot of money. So I think at the end of the day, what we're trying to identify here is that energy efficiency isn't just this compliance matter. It's just good business. right? You're doing this to help your clients. And at the end of the day, you know, in DC in particular, but certainly in Montgomery County and Maryland, buildings make up a huge part of the greenhouse gas inventory for these jurisdictions. And existing buildings are going to be here for a long, long time. You know, we can address new construction through code, but for all of us existing buildings, BEPS is going to be the tool that's going to help us to engage in the practice of energy efficiency and to do better. This is how we do our part. We talked a little bit about the dates. I think I don't need to go over this again. One thing that I think was interesting is if you subscribe to the Montgomery County DEP newsletter, their most recent edition came out this week, and they noted that in group 3 and 4, so buildings that have to be benchmarking now, last year's data by June 1st of this year, their compliance rate as of last week was somewhere around, I think it was like 65%. So almost a third of the buildings that are in this group that have to be benchmarking have not yet done it. If you haven't done it, you know, you're probably going to be in a little bit of trouble, but I think the goal with the county is not to penalize you, it's to get people engaged. So if you realize, my gosh, I should have been doing this and I haven't been, reach out to DEP, tell them that you're on it. I think communication is the most important thing that any of these entities are looking for. Where you will get in trouble is if you try to stuff this under a stack of papers and pretend like it doesn't exist. That's when you'll start to see fines. So thinking about benchmarking, right, as property managers, as people at management companies, maybe on maintenance staff, somebody's come to you perhaps and said, hey, I got this letter in the mail that says I have to do this, take care of this for me, right? And I know you're thinking this is going to be a big pain in the butt, and you're probably right. If you are doing this for just your property or a small number of properties and you've never done it before, there are a lot of ways in which you will have a learning curve that may make this a complicated and time-consuming process for you. And so when you're asking yourself, do I do this or do I hire somebody? You know, ask yourself these questions. Do I have the staff and the skills to do this right? Is this going to be time sense, you know, do I have time to do this, or is this going to take me off of my core competencies in my job? What's the cost? You know, if I think about how much time I'm going to spend, what's the value of my time, right? Do I have the knowledge to do this? And what's the worst that can happen? I think we heard from Yolanda, the worst that can happen is a $7.5 million fine. So there are some serious downside risks here to doing this and to doing it wrong. And lastly, think about, do I have the credentials required? And so for Montgomery County, the first time you benchmark, you have to go through this data verification process. For DC, you have to do your verification next year. And verification requires people to have one of a certain number of professional designations, like a CEM, Certified Energy Manager designation, or a PE, Professional Engineer designation. Each of the jurisdictions has a list of acceptable professional requirements to do data verification. My argument, of course, is you ought to hire somebody, but let's get into how the process works. So first of all, you know, engage with a benchmarking professional. Find somebody that knows what they're doing, that's done a lot of these, that has the wherewithal and the capacity to do it properly. Get your basic property details. We'll talk about that in a little more detail. We'll talk about how to get utility data that doesn't necessarily require you Xeroxing bills and circling numbers. Everything has to be done in Energy Star Portfolio Manager. The data verification has to be done depending on the time and the jurisdiction. And then you have to report all this to the relevant government agencies. But just when you report, that doesn't mean that you're done. There's more, and we'll talk about what you do after you benchmark. So basic property details, you'll need to know the gross floor area of your building. And we'll talk about this on the next slide in a little more detail. This is not the rentable square footage. This is not the number from DC Office of Tax and Revenue. This is most certainly not the number you get from Montgomery County. You'll need to know if any of the property is irrigated. Not super important, but sometimes properties have irrigated areas, and if you are in DC, you have to report on water use, and this does play a factor in your water score. You need to know what year the building was built, not what year it was turned over to you, not when your management started, not when the renovation was done, when it was constructed. The occupancy of the building. So if you're in an apartment building, just the average occupancy over the previous 12-month period. In condos, you can generally assume it's 100%. The number of buildings, the number of stories, the number of units, And where I see people get tripped up is the number of bedrooms. So you have to count how many 1s and 2s and 3s do I have. Studios count as one bedroom. So you got to know the total number of bedrooms. Is there a common entrance? Typically the answer is yes. Sometimes if you've got, a townhouse style or a garden, there might be individual entrances without common entrances, just something that they ask that the number of laundry hookups in the units in common areas. So each dryer and each washer counts as one hookup. So if you've got a washer and a dryer, that's 2. So you got to know how many laundry hookups there are. The percentage of the building that can be heated and cooled, generally it's going to be 100% unless you have, garage vestibules or other non-conditioned spaces. Parking, you have to understand the size of your parking. Is it enclosed? Is it open, partial? Do you not have any parking? Is the parking space conditioned? What's the size of it? And you're going to need all those utility data, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. So getting into just a little more detail on gross floor area, this is really important, and this is one of those things that I find that a lot of folks don't have right, and it has major implications. So again, as Luke was saying, if you think about the score that you're getting, it's largely a function of your total energy use divided by your square footage. So if you have square footage and you are over-reporting, your building is 200,000 square feet and you're reporting that you're 240,000 square feet, you're over-reporting by 20%. It means that on paper, your building is going to look better than it actually is doing. And God forbid you get down the line and you find out in 3 or 4 years that you've been over-reporting, all of a sudden you are in a different position with regards to compliance. You'll find that you'll have much more ground to cover and much less time to do it. Alternatively, we've seen a huge number of cases where the data provided by DC or Montgomery County is wrong, and typically it's an undercount. So if you're taking their data and they say your property is 100,000 square feet, but really you're 120, your property is going to be looking worse than it's actually doing, and you're going to be spending money on solutions that perhaps you don't need. So getting that GFA number right is really important. There's some information in the slide on the left side that talks about what is included and what's not included. If you have a plat that you can use, you can hire somebody to calculate the GFA. If you have as-built and plans, you can hire somebody to give you the GFA if it's not clearly denoted. I've come across a few examples where these documents don't exist. There are no plats, there are no plans. The building was from the 50s or the 60s and it's changed hands 15 times. And in those cases, we've actually had to hire a surveyor to come out, laser the perimeter of the building, create a scale drawing and measure it that way. And that can be its own fun bit of time consuming and expensive challenge. So think about GFA very, very carefully. Do not, under any circumstances, take the number given to you by DC or Montgomery County. More often than not, it will be wrong, and that will have major implications for you. A little bit on utilities. If you have a property that is master meter and you get 1 or 2 electric bills and 1 or 2 gas bills, it's easy enough to gather all of those up. But a lot of us have properties that are individually metered. I might have 100 apartments and they might each have their own electric account. And obviously, PEPCO is not going to give you individual data for individual accounts. It's a privacy issue, and you're not going to be able to get it from your tenants. So there is a process to request aggregate meter data from the utilities. You'll need to know the addresses associated with the property, and it takes time. So if you go to PEPCO and say, I'm at 5400 Connecticut Avenue, it's a high-rise building with 100 apartments, PEPCO will say, great, give us a month. And they'll come back in 30 days and they'll give you a list of all the meters that they have associated with that address. But you'll need to check that list carefully. It's possible that they will over or undercount. We've seen it both ways. So in that case, if you have 100 apartments and a house meter and you're expecting to have 101 meters return and PEPCO only comes back with 80, you know that there's a problem, something's missing, and you'll have to physically send somebody into your utility space to do what's called a meter audit, to take pictures and document every meter that you have and make sure that what you submit to PEPCO as the data that you wish to return is accurate. Because again, if you are missing meters, your data is going to be off. And again, your actions that you take as a result of that data will be off. It's junk in, junk out here. So it has to be good going in. once you give the data, once you've verified the meter list that Pepco gives you, it's going to take them then another 30+ days to return the data to you. And again, if you are doing this right before the compliance deadline and there are 1,000 other buildings hitting Pepco up for this data, it's going to take them even longer. So don't wait until a month or even 2 months before the reporting deadline. You know, even if you don't have to benchmark your property in Montgomery County until June 1st of next year, consider doing it this year, because once you've established these data links with Pepco and Washington Gas or BG&E, they keep it up to date for you and it exists in perpetuity. You only have to do it once, right? The setup here is the hardest part. Once you've done it, you're out of the woods. Real quick, some folks might need to provide meters for Washington Gas. It's more common to have master meter for gas, less common to have individual gas meters, particularly in older buildings. There are a bunch of places you can get the numbers. You can get them on your bill. Second page, right under this next read date. And then these are some pictures that show you what the meter looks like on each of your gas meters. It's definitely worth having this in hand. If you give Washington Gas a meter number, they'll return the data back to you within a couple of days. Washington Gas, for whatever reason, is surprisingly quick about this. So you've done your benchmarking, you've complied, fantastic. What do you do now? Well, first of all, I think this was mentioned earlier, stay engaged. Have your Energy Star portfolio manager credentials, check them, check the results. Just because you hire somebody doesn't mean they're going to do a great job. And we've inherited properties done by people that I thought would be top shelf that have made all sorts of errors. So it's really important that even if you hire somebody, that you understand the basics of what they're doing and that you double check their work, right? Once you've done that and you've done your benchmarking and you understand how you're doing well, you're doing not well, and you're thinking about long-term, how do I comply with these benchmarking requirements? What do I do? I think the first step is to make a plan. And in our space, a plan is an energy audit. And we'll talk a little bit later about some of the resources available to help you pay for the cost of that. But getting an audit done is a very important way that you can understand your property, where your energy is going by the types of systems in your property, and where your opportunities for improvement are. Definitely don't just put this in a folder and stick it away. Talk about the results with your staff. Talk about it with your operations and maintenance teams. Talk about it with your regional managers and your site staff. Make sure that understanding how you're doing is part of the conversation you have when you're looking at your buildings. And then again, you'll have to do this benchmarking every year. So you'll have an opportunity to see over time where the trend lines are. Are you doing well? Are you continuing to do well? Are you improving? Are you getting worse? These are important things to keep in mind. And again, making that part of your management paradigm is going to help you succeed as BEPS gets along. And I think, I want to leave folks with the thought that, yes, this is complicated. Yes, it can be difficult, but you can do it. There are people out there that can help you to do it. And I've seen plenty of examples of buildings that were built in the 50s and 60s that have really taken efforts to improve their energy performance with HVAC and mechanical and solar and building envelope, and they have Energy Star scores in the 90s. Conversely, I've also seen properties built to LEED standards in the 2010s that have Energy Star scores in the 60s. So, it's not just a function of how new or old your building is, it's a function of how you run it. And I like to leave all these presentations with this quote, which is that energy efficiency isn't low-hanging fruit, it's fruit lying on the ground. So get out there, pick it up. It's good business. It'll make you look good in front of your clients. And if you need anything, you can call any of us anytime.
That was excellent, Adam. Really appreciate it. And I think the things that especially resonated with me are really getting into the understanding of what your gross square footage is, and understanding that can really have an impact on how your building performs or looks like it's performing as it relates to these regulations. So taking the time to set up your property from the get-go and also with the utility providers is super important. Luke, can you tell us a little bit about how Bernstein uses benchmarking practices, not only for compliance purposes, but to add value across your real estate portfolios?
Sure, definitely. So, I think the key thing with benchmarking with BEPS is you're really trying to understand like how you can be more efficient. There is a bit of a difference, of course, between like the DC BEPS and some of the Maryland and Montgomery County BEPS targets. But in general, like the goal of all these programs is to save money, reduce expenses, which is of course also the goal of any property management professional. So one thing we like to do is to sort of, you get the benchmarking results, you can compare all of your buildings, you can see what buildings, maybe they're like you've controlled for all the other factors. They might be managed by the same management team. Maybe the same maintenance technician is even taking care of both buildings. But one building is using significantly more, say, gas during the winter months than another building. That might be a very specific issue with the heating system, right? Like you can better target your interventions once you get a really good firm grip on the utility data. And that's something that, we found to be very effective. While it's not, energy as much energy related, like water expenses are also growing across the region. So that is another key area. I often preach the gospel of toilet replacements. They save a ton of water and a ton of expenses. They do have environmental benefits if you're using less water, but it's less energy that you're saving with that. But that is something that, the DC approach to benchmarking your water use against competitors has made us think about, certainly. And, it's a really good model for how energy use should also be treated in buildings based on this. And another sort of thing that we've really invested a lot of time in is working with various agencies. So, up on the screen are some resources. DCSEU, it's the DC's Sustainable Energy Utility. It's a group that is similar to IMT in some ways, like it helps properties, residents, businesses become more energy efficient, make use of sustainability practices in a variety of ways. And three things that we've used in the past that we think we would recommend to anybody out there who's in DC would be some of the training opportunities they offer. So there's this Train Green program that they'll offer to residents, businesses. There are, a few different categories you might fall within, but you could potentially have, members of your staff get some training. You could be LEED certified. You could get, a very particular multifamily building analyst training through them, and that then upskills your staff at low cost, which I know I've personally done, and I would recommend others look at it because it's a great way to kind of improve your staff skills and your staff's understanding. The second item, like more technical assistance and audit support. As was mentioned earlier, audits are really helpful tools for buildings. So DCSEU offers certain pieces of assistance, including grants to assist with some of the ASHRAE Level 2 audits, depending on certain criteria you might meet. I really recommend looking at that. Signing up as well for their newsletter, because you'll get, I think actually similar to IMT, like newsletters I've always found are really helpful from a lot of these organizations, because they'll bring up new topics that you might not have thought of previously, and make you aware of changes in the various grant programs that are out there. Finally, DCSU offers a lot of pay for performance and custom rebates. This is when you're actually doing a project, when you're at the final stage of, you need to replace a system, you need to make some big investment in your property. I really highly recommend trying to talk with somebody over at DCSU, because they have really smart engineers. They're very focused on like how buildings can operate a bit better. And they might be able to offer you some rebates that, at a relatively low cost will make your building more efficient for the long term. And, we've certainly used them in the past. They've given us some really great ideas. And, that's a free resource if you just sort of talk with them. And most of their engineers are happy to talk. They might be busy, so don't bother them about everything. But we found that program in particular is pretty helpful. And it can at least give you ideas, even if the full funding might not be offered for everything you're looking to do. So alongside those IMT resources that were mentioned earlier, these are some great ones that we've made use of.
You're muted, Hannah.
Really going there. I was just going to say we're a little close on time. So Yolanda, if you don't mind closing us out just very briefly at a high level, the IMT Hub also collects a variety of resources for industry stakeholders that we'd love to have you just run through so folks on the line are aware of them and can reach out for more info.
No problem. So there are some DOEE resources as well. You do have the DOEE Beam Help Desk, which you do not have to set up an account. You can just go through the link, and if you have a question about anything, benchmarking, data verification, anything, just shoot them an inquiry. They typically try to respond within a week. You have the energy audit report help and tools from DOEE resources. Next slide. You also have resources that the hub, the IMT side gives as well. We have just the basic understanding of BEPS. We do also provide information on benchmarking, and we have DC building code information to help you with. There's another resource that we also have that I like to really push to building owners. We have a vendor portal. So if you are in need of a vendor and you're tight on your budget and you need help and you want to make sure the vendor is accredited properly and know what they're doing, we do have a vendor portal for you to tap into and kind of find a vendor that fits your budget and will help you get these things done. Next slide. And we do too also have a BEPS compliance pathway wizard, as well as a BEPS compliance pathway, and information with the pathway timelines, the energy audit scope of work that we have listed. But like I said, my favorite and the most important as a facilities manager is to find a vendor portal. I find that to be very helpful to everyone. And the last bit of resources, which Luke also spoke on, are the resources that DCSEU provides, the DC Sustainable Energy Utility Unit. They do have the DC Green Bank that could help you with funding. So tap into those things. And then the hub, has funding and a financing map, a searchable database for all available incentives and financing available to supporting buildings and their improvements. So there's a lot of resources out there. If you don't know where to start, Luke, Adam, myself, reach out to us and we can kind of help you. We can help you get on track and get where you need to be.
Thank you so much, Yolanda. That was great. And I'll just finish up with a brief closing comment and then we can move to questions. I know there's already been a very lively chat, and Adam has also put together an excellent list of resources here that you can see on the slide related to Montgomery County, DC, and then also at the national scale. And that is what I wanted to close with. So Berkshire is a national multifamily owner operator. We have about 115 plus properties, equity assets across the country. A lot of our job is paying attention to these regulations and making sure we are proactively managing them and adding value through our compliance process by reducing costs and adding value. And I will say, owners are getting more educated. And if there's a potential buyer for your building, right, they're going to be looking up your Energy Star score. They're going to be looking up your compliance associated with these regulations. They're going to be asking you if you are liable for any fines or penalties associated with non-compliance. This is also not going away. If anything, it is getting stronger and stronger every year. So I've been in the building space for about 10 years now. It started out with a handful of regulations across the country. It is just an exponential growth. We've got, federal government oversight and encouragement of these initiatives because buildings are some of the primary greenhouse gas contributors to our national carbon footprint, as Yolanda mentioned earlier. And so what we really wanted everyone to leave this conversation with is that as a property management professional, we want you to turn this challenge into an opportunity, not just for you, but for your employer and for your building and your local jurisdiction, right? You can help your building owner stay on top of the situation here. You can share the communications received from the local government. There's been a lot of chat going on about, do I get emails or letters? If you are an on-site professional, please do not throw them away. Give them up the chain of command so that people are aware of the situation. If you identify an efficiency opportunity or a leak or a piece of the building that's malfunctioning, tell someone immediately. Not only do you save costs, but you're improving the building performance and the compliance situation. This is good for everyone. And so, you know, the best thing we can do is embrace it and incorporate it into our skill set. So I will pause there, and I think we can open it up for questions via the chat. Oh, I'm seeing somebody talking, but people are on mute.
No, it's new
Oh,
now,
okay.
so I understand some of you definitely might have to leave, but if you want to stick around and do have questions, with the panelists and I will be here. Thank you, Hannah, Yolanda, Luke, and Adam for your time today. Lots of great information. I will be sending the slide deck with live links to all the resources that we mentioned out to all of the attendees later today, and we'll make a recording of this session available as well. Feel free to unmute yourself and come on camera if you have questions that you'd like to share. It looks like lots of folks asked questions in the chat, but all of our panelists were too quick. We answered them all in the chat. I don't think there's anything outstanding from the chat. So let's hear from you. Any questions from the group? Or were we that thorough? All right, it looks like maybe we answered everything. I anticipate we will be back with more educational content about efficiency best practices. As Hannah stated, this is a tremendous opportunity. None of these regulations are going away. So we will continue to do our best to keep you informed about measures that you can take to comply and to help improve our environment. All right, everybody. Well, thanks for your time today. I appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.